My name is Rachel Lawson. I'm 39, and I've spent the last 17 years being the invisible one at family gatherings. In the Lawson household, invisibility was a skill I never wanted but somehow perfected. My younger sister Madison, the darling of Charleston society, never missed a spotlight. I never got one. Tonight was no different. The chandelier-lit ballroom of the Magnolia Harbor Country Club sparkled with crystal glasses, silk gowns, and the kind of air-kissing that made my skin itch. Madison's engagement party was in full swing, complete with a rented string quartet and a champagne tower that could pay my month's rent 3 times over. I stood by the bar, nursing a ginger ale, never a good idea to drink while wearing a badge, even off duty. Madison floated toward me like a couture-clad swan in her $4,500 gown, every strand of her honey-blonde hair perfectly curled. Her fiancé, a corporate attorney named Daniel Whitmore, lingered a few steps behind, smiling for the room like a campaign poster. "Rachel, sweetheart," a Madison said, using the tone she'd perfected since childhood, the one that made an order sound like a favor. "Could you do me a huge one? The catering staff is short-handed. Maybe you could lend a hand in the kitchen? You're always so good at practical things." Translation: You're the help, not a guest. And she'd said it loud enough for half the room to hear. I set my glass down without a word. The laughter and chatter swelled again as I walked away, past my mother's tableware, and Carol was whispering, "She's still single, you know. 39. Working as a, what is it again?" My mother didn't look up from her champagne. "Some patrol thing. Highway police, maybe. She's always been independent. Madison's the one who really made something of herself. If they only knew. Independent-y was their way of saying failed. They still talked about my trouble in college, as if it were my defining feature. One fight, one disciplinary hearing, and my family had decided my entire life story before I'd even finished my academy training. I pushed through the swinging kitchen doors, but I wasn't there to help with hors d'oeuvres. My duty belt was back at my apartment, but I still had my police-issued phone in my bag by the service entrance. It was buzzing when I pulled it out. 3 missed calls from my precinct captain. 2 from Detective Morales. 1 from an unknown number I knew wasn't really unknown. The text came seconds later. Priority 1. Package arriving in 20 minutes. Need you in uniform. Immediate briefing. And just like that, I wasn't to Rachel the disappointment-y anymore. I was Sergeant Lawson, 15 years in the Charleston Police Department, currently assigned to a multi-agency task force that most civilians didn't even know existed. The shift in my body was instant, like slipping on armor. My sister had her perfect party. I had a possible national security situation unfolding on my phone. But before I left, I had one last thing to do. I stepped back into the ballroom. Madison was tapping her champagne glass for toast, her face glowing under the crystal lights. 200 faces turned toward her, including mine. She launched into a speech about love, family, and the people who have always believed in me. Then, with a little smirk, she added, "And to my big sister Rachel, who, well, she's here tonight, too." The polite laughter that followed had a sting I'd grown used to. But tonight, it didn't stick. Because somewhere out there, a black SUV was headed my way, carrying people who didn't see me as a screw-up. They saw me as the only person they could call. Madison was still soaking in her applause when I felt my phone vibrate again. Short, sharp, deliberate. Another message from the same encrypted number. ETA 3 minutes. Street entrance. Be ready. My eyes scanned the ballroom. No one noticed me except for a few curious glances from people who couldn't decide if I was staff or family. I moved toward the exit when a tall man in a sleek navy suit intercepted me. Rachel Lawson, right? I'm Chris Dalton, Daniel's college roommate. He had the polished confidence of someone used to being listened to. I heard you work in air security? I smiled faintly. Something like that. Mall security? Or like corporate stuff? Before I could answer, the air in the room shifted. A hush rolled through the crowd as two men in black tactical suits entered through the main doors. They weren't wearing uniforms, but everything about them screamed law enforcement. Subtle earpieces, squared shoulders, scanning eyes. One of them caught my gaze and gave the barest nod. My extraction. The taller agent spoke, voice steady but commanding. Looking for Sergeant Rachel Lawson. Every head turned toward me. My mother's face went pale. What's going on? Is she cold? Her voice quivering. Who are these men? I set my glass down on the nearest table. I need to get my gear, I told them, loud enough for the whole room. Gasps followed me as I walked toward the agents. I could hear snippets of whispers. Is she in trouble? Police escort? Maybe she's a witness. We met halfway. The shorter agent leaned in just enough for me to hear over the murmurs. We've got a situation. Captain wants you on the ground in under 20 minutes. Details in the car. Copy that, I said. Madison's perfect smile had faltered. Daniel shifted uncomfortably beside her, as though calculating how this would play in tomorrow's society pages. My father, retired banker, master of keeping appearances, stepped forward, voice carrying like it had when I was a kid in trouble. Rachel, what is the meaning of this? You're disrupting your sister's party. I looked him in the eye for a long moment. The man had never once asked me what I actually did in my job. He'd decided long ago that a police work meant I'd settled for something small. I'm sorry to interrupt, I said evenly, but duty calls. Duty? What kind of duty requires? The taller agent reached into his jacket and flipped open a leather credential case. Federal Joint Task Force. Sergeant Lawson is needed immediately on a classified operation. The silence was instant and heavy. You could hear the soft clink of ice settling in untouched glasses. Classified operation? Madison repeated, like she was tasting the words. National security, the agent confirmed. For years, my family had assumed I spent my nights writing traffic tickets and chasing sharplifters. Now, they were staring at me like they'd just realized I'd been living a second life. Rachel, and my mother said, stepping forward, her voice breaking, why didn't you ever tell us? I paused at the ballroom entrance and turned back. Because you never asked. The night air outside the Magnolia Harbor Country Club tasted like sea salt and cut grass. A black SUV idled at the curb, windows tinted, grille lights winking just enough to make the valets step back. One of the agents opened the rear door, and I slid in, trading chandelier light for the cool glow of a dash-mounted tablet. Sergeant Lawson, the driver said, pulling away. I'm Agent Pierce. This is Agent Vager. Captain Nguyen is on comms. Copy. I clipped the seatbelt, already shedding the soft edges of a big sister, and settling into the sharper outline of who I actually was. Vager handed me a hard case. Inside, my marked tack vest, radio, spare mags, nitrile gloves, a compact medical kit, and my body camera. I shrugged into the vest and felt my pulse slow to a working rhythm. Pierce tapped the tablet. A map of Charleston bloomed, the peninsula, the Ravenel Bridge arcing like a silver bow, the shipping terminals lit up along the harbour. Several blocks pulsed in orange. 15 minutes ago, a DHS courier, call sign Lagoon, triggered a panic code. He was en route to our downtown safe site with a drive containing comms pulled from an encrypted channel. The channel belongs to a crew we've all been watching since spring. Port crew? I asked. Worse. Vager's jaw tightened. A hybrid outfit, smuggling, credit skimming, and lately, precursor chemicals. 2 months ago they started asking questions about hazmat placards and container sequences. Lagoon says tonight was the handoff. He thinks they're moving from research to rehearsal. Targets? I asked. Port fuel staging and convention center loading bays. Soft spots that look hard. Pierce glanced at me. Your name came up because the crew keeps using West Ashley and James Island as staging, and you know those streets better than anyone. Also, Lagoon left his last breadcrumb 2 blocks from the country club. I looked down at the tablet. A red dot blinked on a service alley behind a shuttered florist. You telling me my sister's little fairytale soiree almost got a surprise guest? Looks that way. Vager handed me an earpiece. Task Force Net. Call in when you're hot. I synced to channel, and Captain Nguyen's voice cut clean through my ear. Lawson, you with me? Online. Capital. Good. Career's phone went dead 90 seconds after the panic code. We got 1 plate off a doorbell cam, Georgia tags, grey panel van, partial, BZN. Street cams show it headed toward the waterfront through Anson Borough. We're setting a soft block at East Bay. I want you to run point with Pierce and Vager. Morales is spinning up a warrant package, but we're not going to litigate on the curb. If you get eyes, you shadow. No cow beer. Understood, I said, the corner of my mouth twitching. There in no cow beer was for me, specifically. Not unfair. We knifed through downtown with a polite siren chirp at each intersection, blue light washing over brick and live oaks. I pulled my hair into a tight knot and turned my body cam forward. I could still feel the party glitter on my skin, a faint phantom of perfume and champagne. It evaporated as the SUV rolled into the service alley. The florist's sign creaked in the breeze. The alley smelled like damp cardboard and bleach. Pierce killed the headlights and we coasted in dark for the last 20 feet. Vager whispered, "A door on the right." I stepped out, knees soft, weight forward. The door hung half open, chain lock sheared. Inside, the office was small, a fake fig tree, a desk dusted with glitter, a calendar stuck on last month. In the corner, a chair tipped over, 1 leg splintered. On the linoleum, a smear that wasn't quite blood, brownish, sticky, like someone had dropped cold brew and sugar. My flashlight found the rest, a trail of wet shoe prints leading to a back exit and tire tracks outside. Narrow, tandem, panel van. Cap, I said into the MIC, a confirmed sign of struggle at Largo. Correction, Lagoon site. Van likely backed right up to the rear exit. We've got fresh tracks headed east. Copy, a Nguyen said. Sending the plate to downtown LPRs. Stand by for hits. I crouched to the floor. Beside the desk sat a cheap metal trash can. Inside, a garland of white ribbon, 2 receipts, and, there, a thin rectangle of thermal paper torn in half. I eased it open with my glove. It was a parking stub for the aquarium garage, time-stamped 22 minutes earlier. I handed it up to Vager. If they staged here, they needed quick cover and a place to switch vehicles. That garage exits onto Concord and has a blind corner onto Calhoun, which lets you hop to the port or the convention center without touching the main drags, E. Pierce added. Smart. The tablet chimed. Hit, E. Pierce said. LPR at East Bay and Cumberland clocked a grey panel van, partial BZN, 2 minutes ago. Headed north. I felt the city bend in my mind, turning puzzle pieces until they clicked. If they're going north on East Bay, they'll either cut to Morrison to skirt the market traffic or slide along Concord to the terminal roads. Pierce was already climbing behind the wheel. We roll. Back in the SUV, I gave updates in short bursts. Parsing Cumberland. Minimal foot traffic. Wind from the harbour. If they're holding the courier, they'll want movement and noise to cover any negotiations. Vager eyed me. You believe he's alive? I believe if they wanted him gone, would be standing over a body and not a broken door chain. They need something off him. A passphrase, a second factor, a physical token. I paused. Which means he has value, for now. Nguyen came back hot. We just got a ping off Lagoon's ankle beacon. It's weak, shielded, but moving north at 20 miles per hour. That's your van. Concord or East Bay? I asked. Concord. Then they don't trust Market Street. They're avoiding cameras and tourists. We can shave a minute if we take the service road by the Maritime Centre. I pointed, and Pierce swung the SUV left, the tires humming over the drawbridge plates. As we cleared the bend, I saw it, headlights sliding past the warehouse siding, the boxy silhouette of a work van with a roof rack and no decals. BZN. The brake lights flashed once at a stop sign that everyone ignores at this hour. It paused just long enough to feel rehearsed. Visual, EI said. Grey panel van, Georgia tags. Distance 60 yards. 3 souls minimum. Following, no lights. Pierce eased us into the shadow of a semi-trailer. Vager lifted binoculars. Passenger is on a phone. Driver checks mirrors like his life depends on it. He adjusted focus. And there, behind the grate, someone's in the cargo bay. Shoes pressed to the bulkhead. My throat tightened, not with fear but with a clean line of focus. Cap, we have probable courier in vehicle. Requesting secondary unit to set a soft stop at the next intersection. We'll maintain distance. Unit Delta is 3 blocks out, a Nguyen said. No lights. We do this gentle. Gentle. I flexed my fingers, feeling the familiar rasp of the stippling on my sidearm's grip. In the window reflection, the faintest outline of my face looked back, no makeup left, hair scraped back, eyes steady. Not the sister who stands at the edge of photographs. The cop who steps into the frame when other people step out. The van rolled through the last light and took the curve toward the old ferry lot, where the river widens and the wind always smells like iron. It slowed, blinked right, and nosed into the far corner under a dead street lamp. A second vehicle sat there, an old green pickup, nose out. A hand waved from the cab. Hand off. Pierce killed our engine and let momentum carry us 2 more car lengths. Delta, you close. 2 out, ear voice said. Coming from the south. On my mark, a new yen said in my ear, calm as a metronome. We'll box but not bump. Lawson, you take contact. You're the only uniform they'll recognize as local. Piss, Vager, you float left and right. No long guns unless they go first. I opened the door into air that tasted like rain. The river slapped quietly against pilings. Somewhere far off, a horn bellowed, an enormous animal reminding smaller creatures whose water this was. I walked into the thin light, palms visible, vest letters bright. Evening, ere I called out, voice pitched flat. Charleston Police. Driver, cut the engine for me. The van's brake lights glowed brighter, then died. The driver didn't move. In the passenger seat, a man lifted his phone toward the windshield, camera ward, like he wanted evidence of, ear what? That he'd been polite? That locals had overreached? Hands, ere I said, a notch louder. Both of you. I want to see hands. The passenger's hand rose slowly, open, empty. The driver's followed. The green pickup's door cracked, and a figure slid 1 foot to the pavement. Stay in the truck, I said without looking, my tone more steel than volume. For a heartbeat, the whole scene held. Men, metal, river. Then from the van's cargo bay came a sound I knew better than my own name, a muffled stomp, then 3 quick kicks against sheet metal. Not panic. A pattern. I angled my head, meeting Vager's eyes across the hood. He nodded. He'd heard it, too. Cap, I said, never taking my eyes off the van. Courier is alive and signaling. We're going to treat this as a welfare check and a traffic stop. Copy. Copy, a new yen said. Delta, now. 2 unmarked sedans ghosted in from either side and parked with casual precision, like locals arriving late to a movie. We had our soft box. I took another step. The driver finally spoke, voice smooth, practiced. Officer, is there a problem? There is if that's a person in your cargo area, I said. Step out and we'll clear it up. He smiled at the windshield, like we were sharing a joke. I'm sure you have a warrant. I'm sure I have exigent circumstances. I kept my tone light. Door. Now. A beat. Then a quiet click as the passenger lock popped up. Behind me, tires hissed on wet pavement, the slightest sound, the smallest warning. I didn't need to look to know a crowd was gathering at the edges of our scene. Curiosity, concern, cell phones. That was Charleston, too, porches and neighbors and people who don't want trouble but will lean forward to make sure the trouble isn't worse than it needs to be. The passenger eased his door open with 2 fingers, slowly, like he was defusing a bomb. The driver followed, hands high. Their clothes were generic workwear, grey polos, cargo pants, clean sneakers. The kind of uniform you never remember until it's too late. Vager, I said softly, and he was already moving, peeling to the side toward the cargo door. The green pickup's engine coughed to life. "Cut it," I called, not turning. "Now." It idled, reluctant, then died. A hand retreated from the ignition. Vega reached the back of the van and put his palm to the handle. He looked at me. I nodded once. He cracked the door. Inside, in the dim rectangle of space, a man sat on the floor with his wrists zip-tied in front of him, a strip of duct tape stuck to his sleeve instead of his mouth, as if someone had changed their mind mid-kidnap. His eyes found mine. Steady. Awake. "Evening, Lagoon," I said, keeping my voice dry. "You picked a dramatic night." "Didn't want to interrupt the string quartet," he rasped. Somewhere behind us, thunder rumbled low over the harbor. The wind shifted, and the scent of rain pushed the night 1 inch closer. "All right," I said, letting my breath settle into the pocket where decisions make sense. "We're going to do this clean." And for the first time since I'd left the chandelier light, a thought about my family drifted in. Madison's cracked smile, my father's furrowed brow, my mother's trembling question. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" Because in moments like this, there wasn't time to tell. There was only time to do. Vega had Lagoon halfway out of the van when the driver made his move. A flash of motion, shoulder twist, heel pivot, and he bolted toward the river. Pierce swore and broke left. I grabbed for the driver's arm, but he was fast and knew the terrain. He cut between a stack of rusting crab traps and a forklift, heading for the dark strip of shoreline where the streetlights didn't reach. "Pierce, stay with him," I called, spinning toward the pickup. The man inside had slammed it into gear, trying to angle around us. "Not tonight." I stepped in front of the hood, hand out, voice sharp. "Kill it. Now." The driver hesitated, and that was all Vega needed. He yanked the man's door open from the far side, hurling him out like an empty duffel bag. The guy hit the pavement hard enough to knock the wind out of him. Behind us, Lagoon was leaning against the van, breathing hard, zip ties cut. "They were moving me to a secondary site," he rasped. Didn't get to see much. Cargo bay had no windows, but I heard them talking about a load-in tomorrow night at the pier. "Pier number?" I asked. 18. Something about a container that doesn't exist on the manifest. He wiped his face with the back of his hand. "You've got maybe 24 hours. Nguyen's voice cracked in my earpiece. "Lawson, we'll take custody of Lagoon. You and the team secure both suspects and the vehicle. Forensics will sweep it before sunrise." "Yes, Mum." The tide slapped against the pilings, and the air carried that iron salt bite you only got in Charleston before a storm. My gloves were damp when I flexed my fingers. I looked back toward the party lights in the distance, tiny, soft, and far away. Madison would be holding court again, telling everyone how her sister had overreacted to some work thing. Except this time, people would remember the men in tactical suits. They'd remember me walking out with them. We loaded the suspects into the back of the second sedan, double-cuffed. Pierce popped the van's hood, taking photos of the VIN while Vega bagged a burner phone from under the passenger seat. I called it in. "Vehicle is clear. We'll need a flatbed here. Secure transport to the impound at Columbus Street Yard." "Copy," a dispatch replied. As the sedans rolled off with our detainees, I finally allowed myself to exhale. Vega leaned against the van, giving me that sideways look. You could have gone full SWAT on that driver. I shrugged. We had witnesses. And I'm in uniform. Public trust matters. Pierce came back from the shoreline, empty-handed but breathing hard. Lost him in the marsh. Probably knows every plank and piling out here. He'll surface, EI said. People like that always do, usually when they think we've stopped looking. The rain finally broke, slow and deliberate, soaking my vest in minutes. We climbed back into the SUV, the wipers beating a steady rhythm. Lagoon was already gone, on his way to a federal safe house. Nguyen came on again. Lawson, nice work tonight. But you're not done. Intel's flagging that Pier 18 shipment. You'll be pointed for interdiction. When? I asked. Tomorrow night. And Lawson, bring your A-game. DHS and Coast Guard are both in. It'll be joint command. I closed my eyes briefly, feeling the hum of the SUV under me. Copy that, capital. Pierce glanced at me in the rear view. Guess your sister's not the only one with a big day coming up. I smirked, but my mind was already turning over the details. Entry points, staging positions, wind direction off the water. There'd be no chandeliers tomorrow night, no champagne to hide behind. Just the cold geometry of a pier, a shipment that shouldn't exist, and the quiet satisfaction of doing the job. Somewhere in the city, my family was still talking about me. But tomorrow, I wouldn't be their subject. I'd be the one moving the pieces they'd never see. And honestly, I preferred it that way. By morning, the rain had moved on, leaving the Charleston air sharp and clean. From my apartment balcony, I could see container cranes standing against the Dorne like skeletal giants. Somewhere in that labyrinth of steel and seawater, Pier 18 waited. I was halfway through my second cup of coffee when the secure phone lit up. Lawson, a Nguyen said, voice clipped but steady. Joint briefing in 1 hour, Coast Guard station. Bring full tack gear. We've got the manifest. What's the target look like? A 40-foot container marked for a scrap metal exporter in Savannah. Manifest says industrial parts, weight consistent with scrap. But the bill of lading's a ghost, registered to a shell company dissolved 2 years ago. And it's still getting on a pier? Somebody's pushing it through, Ishi said. We just don't know who yet. By 0800, I was in the conference room at the Coast Guard base, a wall of windows showing cutters rocking gently at their berths. Around the table, DHS analysts, Coast Guard intel officers, CBP supervisors, and 2 faces from my own department. The map on the big screen pulsed with digital overlays, access points, patrol routes, camera blind spots. Pierce and Vager flanked me, flipping through printouts. A Coast Guard commander with a voice like gravel laid it out. The shipment's due to unload at 23:15. We'll have a 2-minute window when the crane sets it on the dock before it's moved into the secure stack. That's our grab point. After that, it disappears into port storage, and we're fighting paper trails. And if they get spooked? I asked. Then we follow the container to wherever they're taking it. But that's risky, lots of dark corners between here and the yard. The DHS rep tapped his folder. We think the cargo's chemical precursors. Nothing inherently illegal in small quantities, but in bulk, combine it with the right agents, you've got an industrial scale hazard. I leaned forward. So we treat it like a hazmat intercept. Exactly, either rep said. Full PPE on standby. Assignments rolled out like clockwork. My team would stage in an unlit section of Pier 17, close enough to move when the crane dropped our target. Coast Guard would have a cutter just outside the harbour mouth to intercept any water escape. CBP would ghost along the yard perimeter in unmarked trucks. By 2200, the port was a different world. Floodlights bleaching the asphalt, cranes groaning overhead, forklifts weaving between stacks like beetles in a hive. The air smelled of diesel and salt. My vest felt heavier than usual, the weight of the badge offset by the weight of what we might find. 17 staging, a Pierce murmured in my earpiece. Target crane is spinning up. From the shadows between stacked containers, I watched the operator's cab inch a steel arm toward the freighter's deck. The container rose, dangling like bait on a line, then swung slowly over to Pier 18. Mark it, EI said, and Vager's laser dot painted the ID number in our HUD feed. It touched down with a deep metallic boom. Forklift lights flared as 2 drivers moved in. Stand by, a Nguyen's voice said. Wait for clear ground. But the ground didn't clear. 2 men in high-vis vests stepped into the zone, 2 clean, 2 new, no grease on their gloves. They weren't dock crew. They gave the forklift a hand signal, then positioned themselves on either side of the container's locking bars. Those aren't longshoremen, a Pierce muttered. Go, a Nguyen ordered. We moved fast, 3 shadows breaking from the gap, boots silent on the damp asphalt. I hit the first vest at a run, shoulder driving him against the steel wall of the container. The second spun toward Vager, hand going for something at his belt, a collapsible baton, not a tool. Vager swept his legs, dropping him flat. Pierce had already popped the locking bars when I heard it, movement inside. Not the loose clatter of metal. A single, heavy shift of weight. Cap, EI said, we've got live cargo. Nguyen didn't miss a beat. Back it off. Full open with shields. 2 CBP officers hustled in with ballistic panels. Pierce and I swung the doors wide. Inside, under the dim yellow spill of the pier lights, sat 3 industrial drums strapped to a pallet. On top of the drums, zip-tied and gagged, was a man in a stained polo shirt. His eyes locked on mine, alert, scared, and unmistakably alive. Pierce swore under his breath. Not just chemicals. I stepped up, cutting the ties. You hurt? He coughed once. Just cramped. They made me ride on top so I wouldn't touch the drums. Why? He swallowed, eyes flicking to the barrels. Said they were unstable. Nguyen's voice was low in my ear. Lawson, secure the area. Bomb squad is rolling. The port noise seemed to recede, replaced by the thump of my own pulse. Somewhere in the distance, a freighter's horn bellowed, long and mournful. This wasn't just a smuggling op anymore. Whatever was in those drums, someone had been willing to risk moving it under a live witness. That meant urgency. That meant we'd just stepped into the middle of something a lot bigger than a dockside grab. And deep down, I knew it was going to follow me far beyond P18. The witness, mid-40s, lean, wiry, sat on the tailgate of a CBP truck, wrapped in a foil blanket, gulping water from a paper cup. 2 EMTs hovered nearby, checking his vitals. His name was Evan Marks, a longshoreman by trade, but the photo on his port badge was 2 years old. Either he'd been laying low, or someone had been keeping him off official rosters. I stayed close enough to hear while bomb squad suited up. The drums sat on the pier like sleeping beasts, straps still tight. They were matte black, each stenciled with a faded hazard diamond. The symbols were wrong, edges blurred, lettering slightly off-center. Almost convincing. Almost. Lawson, a Nguyen's voice came through the earpiece. FBI hazmat is inbound. Coast Guard is locking down harbor access. Nobody in, nobody out until we know what's inside those barrels. What about the rest of the container? I asked. CBP's tearing it down now. So far, nothing else but foam spacers. Evan lifted his head when I approached. They loaded me in at the ship's last stop, Freeport. Told me to sit still, keep the lids clean. Paid me cash in an envelope. When I asked what was in the drums, they said fertilizer for a farm upstate. But I've hauled fertilizer. He shook his head. This stuff sweated through the steel. That made my stomach tighten. Sweated? Condensation, he said. Even when it was cold in the hold. I turned toward the bomb squad leader, who was running a one scanner over the closest drum. The device chirped, lights flashing amber. Not red. Not good either. Trace ammonium nitrate, he called out. High concentration. Readings jumping, possible contamination. Nguyen didn't waste a second. All right, everybody clear 20 meters. Secure perimeters. We pulled back toward Pier 17. Using the stacked containers for cover. Pierce kept his eyes on the witness. You believe him? Doesn't matter, I said. If the readings are real, those drums could be one bad weld away from turning the pier into a crater. The FBI hazmat team arrived in a dark Suburban, for agents in grey suits stepping out before the gear cases hit the asphalt. The lead agent, a tall woman with cropped hair and a no-nonsense walk, went straight to Nguyen. I caught fragments of their conversation. Not just nitrate, traces of chlorates, unstable mix. That was enough to make my pulse pick up again. Whoever had assembled this cocktail wasn't just experimenting, they were trying to make it portable. 20 minutes later, the lead agent approached me directly. Sergeant Lawson. I'm Special Agent Kerrigan, FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force. This scene is now federal jurisdiction. I kept my tone neutral. Understood. My team will hold the perimeter until you've got full control. Her eyes flicked to the sidearm at my hip, then back to my face. You're the one who made the initial ID on the target container. Right place, right time, I said. And you intercepted the suspects? With my partners, yes. Then you'll want to know this. Kerrigan lowered her voice. These drums match a batch stolen from a chemical storage facility in Augusta 3 weeks ago. That theft was covered up. State didn't want panic. But it's linked to at least 2 persons of interest we've been tracking for over a year. Local or foreign? She paused. Both. It wasn't much, but it was enough to tell me we were in deep water. International meant layers, shell companies, fake manifests, middlemen who could vanish in 12 hours. And if Augusta had stayed quiet about the theft, then we'd just blown the lid off their secrecy. Kerrigan stepped back as her team began photographing every inch of the container. One tech was taking microsamples from the weld seams. Another was placing a radiation badge on the drum's surface. I checked my phone. 3 missed calls, from my mother, of all people. I didn't answer. She'd probably seen a news blurb about a police activity at Charleston Port and assumed I was traffic control. The idea made me almost laugh. Nguyen came up beside me. "You're off the clock here, Lawson. Feds will babysit the cargo until it's moved to their lab." I frowned. "And the suspects?" "Lawyered up already. One's carrying a Georgia license with an address that doesn't exist. The other's playing mute." "They'll walk," I said flatly. Nguyen gave me a look. "That's not our part anymore." She was right. But it still burned. By 0300, the pier was empty except for a few Coast Guard sentries and the hum of refrigeration units from nearby stacks. We loaded into the SUV, the adrenaline finally bleeding out. "You're thinking too loud," Pierce said from the driver's seat. "Just wondering who's desperate enough to smuggle unstable explosives into Charleston under a live witness," I said. "And what the hell they were planning to do with it." Vager leaned forward. "Whoever they are, they're organized. Clean IDs, matching coveralls, knew the crane schedule. Not amateurs." "Yeah," I said quietly. "And amateurs don't scare me." The city was asleep when we rolled back across the Ravenel. Out on the water, the first hint of grey touched the horizon. In the reflection of the passenger window, I caught my own face, eyes shadowed, jaw tight, and I thought of Madison, of the way she'd looked when the agents came for me at her party. She'd thought she knew who I was. After tonight, I wasn't sure I knew who I was either. By the time I finally got home, the sun was scraping gold across the rooftops. I'd been awake for 23 hours. My couch looked like salvation, but my mind wouldn't shut off. The FBI had the drums. DHS had the manifest. My department was officially off the case. Which meant, in theory, I could let it go. But theory had never been my strong suit. The first thread came from an unlikely place, Evan Marks, the witness. While he was officially under federal protection, port gossip moved faster than official memos. One of my old contacts from the Harbor Patrol texted me a photo of Evan at a Waffle House. Time-stamped less than 4 hours after we'd turned him over. No escort. No FBI tail. If they'd cut him loose that fast, either he wasn't a priority, or someone wanted him to disappear into the noise. I threw on jeans and a bowl cap, grabbed my unmarked car, and headed for the Waffle House on Meeting Street. The place smelled like coffee and fryer oil, same as always. Evan was in a corner booth, nursing a mug, eyes darting to the door every few seconds. He didn't see me until I slid into the seat across from him. "Sergeant Lawson," he said, too quietly to be casual. "You're supposed to be under a protective hold." He gave a half shrug. "They said I wasn't in danger anymore. Told me to go home." "Home where?" "A pores. Doesn't matter. I'm not going there." I leaned forward. "You're scared of something, and it's not the FBI. Tell me what it is." He glanced around the diner, then lowered his voice. "The guys who loaded me in that container, they weren't dock workers. And they weren't the ones in charge. There was a woman, never saw her face clearly, but she had an accent. Eastern European, maybe Russian. Called the shots, and everybody listened. She said something about a second load coming in through Wilmington. North Carolina? He nodded. 2 nights from now. Same setup. Different port. That was it, the hook I didn't know I'd been waiting for. Wilmington was outside the FBI's Charleston jurisdiction. They'd have to coordinate with a different field office, meaning a lag in communication. Which meant I had a window. I left Evan with a fresh cup of coffee and enough cash to get a bus ticket anywhere. Whether he used it or not was his choice. Back in the car, I called Vager. "Tell me you're not still thinking about P18, he said by way of hello. "I'm thinking about P18 and Pier who knows where in Wilmington," I said. "That's not our turf." Neither was last night until it was. A beat of silence. "You're talking about working it off the books." "Not talking. Doing. You in or out?" He sighed, long and theatrical. "You know Pierce will kill us if we don't loop him in." "Then we loop him in." By noon, the 3 of us were crammed into my kitchen, coffee mugs lined up like chess pieces. I laid it out, Evan's lead, the timing, the jurisdiction gap. Pierce was skeptical until I mentioned the Eastern European woman. "She's been on Interpol's periphery for 5 years, he said. Goes by Yelena Volkov. Logistics genius for hire. Moves everything from diamonds to depleted uranium. If she's here, this isn't a one-off." "So we get ahead of her," I said. Quietly. We drove up to Wilmington that afternoon in Vager's beat-up pickup, the kind of vehicle nobody remembers seeing. I pulled strings with an old academy buddy now working the port there, got us temporary access badges as a consultant for a supposed cargo audit. The Wilmington port felt different from Charleston. Tighter quarters, fewer cranes, more shadows between the stacks. We spent hours walking the yard, noting camera coverage, fence gaps, and potential choke points. At 21:45, we parked near a maintenance shed with a clear line to Pier 4, where my contact said a flagged container was due in 2 nights. No one paid us any mind, 3 tired-looking workers with clipboards in hand. Pierce was jotting notes when Vega stiffened. Eyes front, just past the crane. A woman in a dark windbreaker stood near the edge of the pier, talking to a pair of men in reflective vests. She was tall, posture straight, hair pulled back in a severe knot. Even at this distance, there was a precision to the way she moved, small gestures, clipped nods. "Volkov," a Pierce murmured. She didn't look our way, but I had the distinct, prickling sense that she knew we were there. After a few minutes, she turned and walked down the pier toward a waiting SUV. The 2 men stayed behind, rolling a pallet jack toward a container still on the ship's deck. "That's our load," I said. Pierce glanced at me. 2 nights from now? "Or sooner," I said, watching the container shift into the crane's reach. Because if Yelena Volkov was accelerating her schedule, then we were already behind. And I had no intention of staying there. We didn't wait 2 nights. By the next evening, Vager had pulled the ship's updated unloading schedule from a portside dispatcher who owed him a favor. The flagged container was set to hit pier for at 0200, almost a full day ahead of what Evan had told me. Volkov wasn't just moving fast, she was shaving hours off the clock to keep everyone else playing catch-up. We couldn't go in heavy, no warrant, no backup from our own department. But we had eyes, instincts, and the element of surprise. Pierce parked the truck 2 blocks from the main gate, and we came in through a side service road Vager had spotted the day before. The air smelled of brine and hot metal, the hum of generators vibrating in my teeth. Floodlights swept the yard in lazy arcs, leaving just enough shadow to hide in. From our vantage point behind a stack of empty pallets, I could see the container swing down from the ship's crane, the steel box gleaming wet in the spotlights. 2 workers in high-vis vests guided it onto a flatbed trailer. And there she was, Volkov. Black windbreaker, dark jeans, boots that made no sound on the concrete. She stood with her hands in her pockets, head tilted as she watched the load settle. There was no mistaking her control over the scene. The dock crew deferred to her without a word. 3 escorts, Pierce murmured. 2 on the flatbed, 1 trailing. Where's the pickup point? I asked. Could be anywhere, Vager said. She's not the type to stick around once the cargo moves. As if on cue, Volkov turned and started walking toward a white SUV parked beyond the loading zone. The driver stepped out to open her door, but she paused mid-stride, scanning the pier. And then her gaze locked, on me. It was too far for details, but I felt it like a current running under my skin. She didn't flinch or call out, just adjusted her posture slightly, the barest acknowledgement that she saw me. Then she got into the SUV, the door closing with a soft, final click. The flatbed pulled away first, heading toward the south access road. Volkov's SUV followed at a leisurely pace, like they had all the time in the world. We can't tail both, Pierce said. We don't need to, I replied. We stick to the cargo. We moved fast, cutting across a gravel lane to Vager's truck. By the time we hit the access road, the flatbed's taillights were already half a mile ahead. I kept our headlights off, using the occasional glow from yard lamps to stay on course. The route wound through the industrial outskirts, chain-link fences, silent warehouses, the skeletal frames of old cranes long out of service. The flatbed slowed at a security checkpoint, the guard barely glancing at the clipboard before waving them through. No scan? Vager muttered. Inside job, I said. Past the gate, the road narrowed to a private dockyard. 2 long sheds flanked the lot, their corrugated metal siding glinting under sodium lamps. The flatbed backed into one of them, the shadows swallowing it whole. We stopped short of the lot's edge, engine off. I'll go in, I said. Pierce's head snapped toward me. Rachel. They don't know my face. Not really. She saw me from 50 yards. Could have been anyone. Vager frowned. And if it's not just cargo in there? Then I'll find out before it's too late. I slipped from the truck, the night air heavy and damp. Staying low, I crossed to the shed's side entrance, a roll-up door half open to let in the breeze. The interior was dim, lit by a handful of work lamps. The container sat dead center, its doors already swung wide. A forklift idled nearby, driverless. 3 men were inside the container, prying open a false wall at the far end. From my angle, I couldn't see what was behind it, just the glint of metal and the sound of wood splintering. Then a voice, smooth and accented, cut through the hum. Careful. That crate is worth more than all of you combined. Volkov stepped into view, her profile sharp against the lamplight. She wore no gloves, no hard hat, just that same windbreaker, zipped to the collar. One of the men grunted as the false wall gave way. Volkov stepped forward, and for a split second, I saw it, a steel case, no larger than a carry-on, stenciled with markings I didn't recognize. My phone vibrated once in my pocket, a silent ping from Pierce. I didn't answer. Volkov turned her head slightly, and I realized with a jolt that her eyes were on the roll-up door. On me. Come in, Sergeant, as she called in flawless English. No need to hide. The three men straightened, hands moving toward the smalls of their backs. I stepped inside, keeping my hands visible. You know my name. Of course, as she said, smiling faintly. Charleston's persistent officer. You have a habit of arriving where you are not invited. Hazardous cargo in my jurisdiction tends to get my attention, I replied. She gestured toward the steel case. Then consider your curiosity satisfied. You've seen it. Now you will leave. Not without knowing what's inside. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. And if I told you, you'd wish you hadn't asked. Something in her tone made the air feel colder. I could hear Pierce's voice faint in my earpiece, telling me to get out. But Volkov's presence was a gravity I couldn't ignore, not when she was this close to whatever she'd been moving through my city. 2 nights from now, she said suddenly, it will be on a plane. After that, no one will see it again. Not me. Not you. And you will forget we ever spoke. And then she turned her back on me, because in her mind, she'd already won. The moment Volkov turned away, I knew walking out wasn't an option. That case wasn't just contraband. It was the kind of thing that could tilt the balance of a conflict, maybe start one. And she'd just told me it would vanish in 48 hours. Her 3 men started to fan out, subtle but practiced. The nearest one, tall with a shaved head, drifted to my left, blocking the roll-up door. Another stepped behind me, the third staying by the case. My earpiece buzzed with Pierce's voice, urgent. Lawson, your vitals just spiked. What's happening? Party's starting, I murmured. Volkov didn't look back. Sergeant, I'm giving you a gift. Walk away with your career, your friends, your life. Don't make me take them from you. You don't scare me, I said. One of her men made the first move, left hand darting for my arm. I pivoted, grabbing his wrist, using his own momentum to throw him into the forklift. The clang echoed through the shed. The second man lunged, and I dropped low, sweeping his legs. He hit the concrete with a curse, air wheezing out of him. The third went for his waist bend, and I drew my sidearm in a clean motion, sights locking on center mass. Bad idea, I said flatly. Volkov turned slowly now, expression unreadable. Impressive, she said, glancing at her men struggling to get up. But you're outnumbered, Sergeant. Not for long, I replied. On cue, the roll-up door rattled as Vega and Pierce stormed in, weapons raised. Pierce took position to my right, Vega to my left, boxing the 3 men in. Charleston PD, Pierce called. Hands where we can see them. 2 of the men complied, hands high, eyes darting to Volkov for direction. She gave them none, just stepped back toward the steel case. That's not yours to take, I warned. Her lips curved into that faint smile again. Everything is for sale, Sergeant. Even you, if I tried hard enough. I stepped forward. You don't have enough money in the world. She looked past me to Pierce and Vega, then back to me. You think you've won something tonight. But this? She tapped the case. It's a small piece. The game is much larger. And you are not ready to play it. Then she did something I didn't expect. She raised her hands. I will go with you, she said. Pierce's brows knit. Just like that? Just like that, she echoed. We cuffed her, secured the case, and read her rights. She didn't resist, didn't speak again during the ride to the Wilmington field office. If anything, she looked bored. By the time we handed her over to federal custody, the case had already been whisked into an evidence vault. I didn't get to see inside. Kerrigan from the FBI showed up in person, her expression somewhere between gratitude and frustration. Good work, Sergeant. But this is our case now. You'll be looped in if we need testimony. Which, in Fed speak, meant we'll bury this where you can't touch it. We drove back to Charleston in silence. The adrenaline crash hit me halfway over the state line. Pierce broke it with a low chuckle. You know, when this started, I thought the craziest thing tonight would be walking out of your sister's engagement party with a federal escort. Vager smirked. Now it's just Tuesday. It was nearly dawn when I finally walked into my apartment. My phone was lit up with texts, half from my precinct, the other half from my family. Madison had sent one line. Mom's been talking about you all night. I think she's proud. I stared at it for a long time. No apology. No explanation. Just that. I set the phone down, poured a glass of water, and stepped out onto the balcony. The city was waking, the air cool and clean after the storm. Somewhere out there, Volkov was sitting in a federal interview room, probably spinning half-truths and deals. The case would vanish into classified files, and the public would never know how close they'd come to disaster. And that was fine. Because I didn't do this for headlines. I did it for the quiet, for the knowledge that tonight, something dangerous didn't make it where it was going. Somewhere, my family might finally be wondering who I really was. Maybe they'd even ask. But whether they did or not didn't matter anymore. I wasn't the invisible sister. I wasn't the disappointment. I was Sergeant Rachel Lawson, and I was exactly where I needed to be.